Hi everybody, I'm Aaron Ellis, and in this video I'm going to discuss block training, block periodization, and two important principles. I'm going to introduce you to what's called concentrated loading and its effectiveness compared to mixed training, and how you can use concentrated loading to take advantage of the long-term delayed training effect, which I'll do in a second video. So a quick about me. I've been a strength and conditioning coach for 17 years. My training background started in martial arts and kickboxing. During the time I was competing, I won a Queensland title and 2 Australian ISKA titles. I've authored a few books. The most notable ones are Absolute Core, The Manual for Developing Unreal Core Strength, Ultimate Kettlebell Workouts, and Simplified Strength. And I'm also a Russian martial arts instructor and a hypnotherapist. So let's go back to the topic, block periodization. So block periodization is rooted in two key principles. The first one is concentrated loading, and the second one is the long-term delayed training effect. So in this video I'm going to discuss concentrated loading versus mixed training, and then I'll do a second video on the long-term delayed training effect. Okay, so what is concentrated loading? Concentrated loading is concentrated training in one aspect, focusing on one goal in a training block, where mixed training, on the other hand, is mixing multiple training goals within a training period. So one of the drawbacks to mixed training is that it dilutes the training effect. So essentially, the adaptation to your workout is spread over many independent goals. So you're training for strength, power, speed, and endurance all at once in the same period. And as a result, there isn't a strong enough stimulus to get stronger, or a really strong stimulus to have better endurance or to become more powerful, because your body's not sure which stimulus is the most important one to adapt to. And also, mixed training requires higher training volumes because you're training for a number of different goals. So the combination of, say, speed, conditioning, power, strength, hypertrophy, all these increase the total training volume. So then the volume increases as you spend more and more time on each of these individual skills. So you might do speed work for 20 minutes, then do 20 to 30 minutes on strength training, 20 minutes on power, and say 30 to 40 minutes on conditioning. And in the end, you end up with a workout that takes a really long time and it's got a high volume of work, as opposed to concentrating your efforts on one training goal. So concentrated loading is focusing on one particular goal at a time. So if you really focus all your efforts on one goal, such as strength, you can accomplish an intense training effect in under an hour. So the overall volume of the work is much lower with concentrated loading. So another problem with mixed training is that it has a low level stimulus. So even though it has higher volumes, and this can seem counterintuitive, but the fact is you can't train at a high intensity with the high volume for multiple goals. And you can't spend an hour on strength and then an hour on speed and then an hour on endurance and an hour on hypertrophy and an hour on speed, on power. Because if you did that, you'd never get out of the gym and you'd be there for 5 hours a day. So because of that, we have to reduce the overall volumes and intensities of work with each independent goal with mixed training. So this leads to a lower level stimulus, because we're not putting high intensity and high volume into any one particular training goal. And as a result, the gains come slow, very slow. So the big problem with the low-level stimulus is that it's just not suitable for advanced athletes, because we know that as you get stronger and you advance in your performance, it takes higher and higher intensities of exercise to further stimulate your adaptation. So for example, when you started bench pressing and you started off doing 60 kilos for 3 sets of 10, that was probably enough to stimulate some strength gains. However, if if you're already up to benching 150 kilos, doing 60 kilos for 3 sets of 10 is not going to be enough stimulation for that person, because you've got to train closer to your 1 rep maximum. So for example, 80%, which is closer to your 1 rep max of 150 kilos, would be 120 kilos. And that's going to be much more intensive and harder on the body than training your body at 60 kilos for your 3 sets of 10. And this is because advanced athletes need higher intensities and higher volumes, and beginners mixed training doesn't really accomplish this goal. So because the intensity has to be lower and the volume has to be lower. So another problem with the mixed training is, because of this, we can only have 2 to 3 peaks throughout a training year. And part of the reason is because the gains come slow, and because of this low level stimulus, we get low level gains and slow progress. And another part of this is that through mixed training, we tend to follow a more linear periodization model, where each week builds up on the previous week and we gradually increase intensity over time. So training cycles generally will need to be in the 12 to 20 weeks length in order to reach a peak. So for a 12 weeks, say, for a training cycle, that means that the maximum number of peaks you can have in a year is 4. And if we're looking at 20 weeks, the maximum length, the maximum number of peaks you could have in a year is 2. So that's with mixed training. This makes it really hard to peak an athlete, because the volume and intensities at the highest level are too high, and then as a result, it's really tough to peak for a specific date or a specific competition, because you're mixing so many different loads. So mixed training versus concentrating loading. We've got concentrated loading, on the other hand, has lots of benefits. So the first one is that concentrating loading has a concentrated effect, so it gives a higher stimulus. So in other words, if we're training in order to get stronger, you train for strength, and 80 to 90% of your volume and intensity is dedicated towards getting stronger. So you're training at higher intensities, and you do all the heavy lifting that you need to get done to get stronger. If you wanted to get more powerful, you'd spend 80 to 90% of your time working on power development. If you want to move faster, you want to move your limbs at high velocities, you'd spend your time working with high velocity movements. So that way we get stronger and more intense training effects, and a more specific training effect for each goal. And this is because the loads are concentrated, because you're only focusing in one block on 1 or 2 goals. I mean, preferably one goal, but at any one time. So this means we end up spending lower volume of work compared to mixed training, but we still have higher intensities. So if we did, for example, 15 sets of high intensity strength work to develop a lot of maximal strength, that's going to be much lower in volume than if you did a huge mixed training program where you did, say, 8 sets on maximal strength training, 8 sets on power training, then did 6 sets of 40-meter sprints, and then you finished with a brutal conditioning circuit where you, supersetted swings and goblet squats for 10 more sets, because the overall number of sets and the amount of volume is going to be much lower when you use concentrated loading, because all of your loads are directed towards the one goal. And this definitely is important and helps recovery, and makes a big difference when we start looking at the next video, where I talk about the long-term delayed training effects. So basically, because we're putting more intensity and more volume towards that one goal, we achieve a higher stimulus despite using overall less volume. So this means that you can give an elite athlete a really high level of stimulus that they need, but without running the risk of overtraining for that person. And another benefit is the fact that you can have multiple peaks throughout the year. So if we utilize the long-term delayed training effect, we can program cycles that are as short as even 4 to 6 weeks, and 6 weeks, even as short as 4 weeks. And this allows to have multiple training peaks, and even more importantly, it allows us to peak for multiple competitions. So for example, you could peak at the start of the year just as a pre-training session, then at fight camp in preparation for competition, and then 6 weeks later you can actually peak for the first fight of the year, and then you can also peak multiple times throughout the year. And this is really important to us because you want to perform at the highest levels during that time, and if you can peak a fighter before the match, the next cycle you'll be reaching a new peak for competition, so that they're the most fresh, most explosive, and most powerful they can be on fight day. And this is basically accomplished with, a short 4 to 6 week block. So wrapping it up here, concentrated loading has lots of advantages over mixed training. Using the concentrated training effect, you can get really large jumps of strength, power, speed. But the number one benefit, I believe, is being able to peak on a specific date with multiple peaks throughout the year. And this is what you want to do as a Muay Thai athlete. Instead of just winging it and just training hard for 4 to 6 weeks, and you're doing conditioning and you're doing pad work and you're running, and you actually plan and you peak and you get your strength before the competition, and then you work the 6 weeks for peaking up to the actual day. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll post another video talking about the long-term delayed training effects and how we can manipulate that to manage multiple peaks that we're talking about during the fight season. So thanks again,